All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in here and get started. It's 10 o'clock on the dot. So thank you so much all for joining me. We've got people from all over America today. That's very exciting to have that. So just to kind of get started and get you off on the right foot, how to increase your viewing experience, turn off everything in the background. I know a lot of times when we attend webinars, we listen to the webinar while we're doing email and having a meeting and Skyping and texting and all that stuff all at the same time. I am going to provide you a jam-packed webinar with a ton of information, and I want to make sure that you're able to get all of that information. So of course, removing distractions is the way to do that. Also wanted to let you know I am going to offer you something at the end. So if you hang on until the end, I'm going to offer you something that I think will make a huge difference for you. So I want to make sure that you're there and ready to receive that information. So just to help ensure that you're in the right place, you're in the right place if you're a manager or a supervisor, an ombudsperson, a CEO, a leader in human resources, a consultant, any kind of influencer, or if you're even just a person who feels bullied. So the point of my webinar today is to give you 10 steps, and they are organizational steps. So if you're an influencer or a CEO or a leader of some sort, you are probably going to be able to implement all 10 steps, and that's a great option for you. If you're a supervisor and you're on this webinar, you may not necessarily be able to implement every single step that I'm going to offer, but you will still get a ton of information that you can take back to your leaders, and you'll also get a ton of information that you can implement all on your own right after the webinar is over, so the information will not be lost on you. And then if you're someone who feels bullied and you're on this webinar, again, the webinar is ultimately offering organizational solutions to the problem of bullying, and you will, however, get some information about bullying. I think I always hear when I talk about bullying, people come up to me after and say, you know, thanks for sort of validating what I'm going through or giving me some verbiage to talk about it. So I know you'll get at least that out of it. And then you'll also get a lot of solutions that you can take to your leaders. So if you want to talk to your leaders about what you're going through, and then be able to offer up some ideas for solving it, you'll definitely be able to take that information away as well. So we're going to go over 3 things over the next 90 minutes. We're going to define workplace bullying just so we're all on the same page. I promised you in some of my emails that I've been sending out that we'll go over harassment versus bullying. That's always a top question. And then we'll jump right into those 10 steps. And most of the webinar will be regarding the 10 steps that I'm going to offer up. Now, you got some emails regarding a workbook, and I just sent you an email about 10 minutes ago with a link to the workbook. If you haven't downloaded it yet, might be just another way to help ensure you're getting everything you can out of this webinar. So definitely download that if you haven't already. So just a little bit about me. Now, if you've seen me speak before or know anything about me, you may have heard this story, but I'll go ahead and share it anyways for those people who don't know me. Ultimately, I became interested in workplace bullying because I was bullied, and I was the director of human resources for a nonprofit organization here in San Diego where I live, and we had a bully. And this person was an uber excessive micromanager. This person definitely made it clear if he didn't like you. You know, he would approach groups of people and maybe he liked 3 out of the 5 people, so he'd really focus on talking with those people and chatting them up and literally just ignoring the other people in the group that he didn't like. He yelled a lot. He made life uncomfortable. And so I personally felt bullied by this person, but so did everybody else. And so as the director of human resources, I was also dealing with bullying as an organization. So I felt bullied, but I was also trying to solve it from an organizational standpoint. And I spent a lot of time talking to the president of the organization about this person's behavior, and I could never quite get him on board. And he would always just say, well, that's just how he is. I don't know why it bothers you. Or you have to be the bigger person. That was his favorite thing. I hated hearing that because it was kind of like, well, why do I have to be the bigger person? Can't you talk to him? Why do I have to build a shield to deal with this person when really you could just talk to him and make a difference. So through all that, I started getting my master's degree at San Diego State University and ended up writing a paper in one of my classes on the topic of workplace bullying. And it was through writing that paper that I discovered there is 30 years of academic research on the topic of workplace bullying, that America is one of the only countries that does not have laws regarding workplace bullying. Other countries, Ireland, Sweden, Denmark, lots of other countries, the UK, they all have laws regarding workplace bullying, and America does not. So you know, it was just a really fascinating experience to write this paper. And since that paper, I have been living and breathing and sleeping and dreaming about workplace bullying. I am obsessed with solving workplace bullying, and it's my life. So that's what I do. I've written a book called Back Off, Your Kick-Ass Guide to Ending Bullying at Work. That book is for targets, people who feel bullied. And I recently released a second book called Seeking Civility. And that book is a short little read, and it basically goes through the 10 steps that I'm going to go through with you today. So that's just a little bit about me. Since then, I've been published in a lot of different mainstream magazines, as well as some more industry-specific kinds of magazines. And I've worked with a huge variety of clients of all shapes and sizes who provide all sorts of different services and things. And so that's my experience. So let's go ahead and jump right in and talk about defining workplace bullying. So there are three concepts central to the definition of workplace bullying. The first concept is that bullying is repeated. So we're not talking about a scenario where one person had a rough day and then the bullying is over, or the incivility is over. That does not count as workplace bullying. What we are talking about are severe, pervasive, repeated, ongoing behaviors, and in fact, researchers who of course have to quantify things in order to study it like to say that bullying happens at least once a week for a period of 6 months, and then it's sort of officially bullying. So that just gives you an idea of what we're talking about with repeated. That's not to say if someone comes to you and says, I'm being bullied, you should say, well, it hasn't been 6 months, you know, come back then, of course, but just to give you an idea. Now, on average, people leave an organization after being bullied for 2 years. So 2 years seems to be the breaking point, and then people leave and they go find a job somewhere else where they're not being bullied. The next piece of the definition is that bullying creates a psychological power imbalance. Now, this is what makes workplace bullying different than conflict. So conflict happens when you have two people who disagree, but they both have a voice. Bullying happens when you have one person who has no voice, and in fact their voice is squashed out, and the other person has a rather loud, overbearing voice and is really controlling the target. So what happens is there's an initial bullying scenario. So there's something that happens. For example, a nasty email, maybe eye rolling at a staff meeting, or there's one initial bullying incident, and for whatever reason in that scenario, people don't stand up for themselves. And so the bully gets this, and it's all subconscious, the bully sort of gets this subconscious idea of like, okay, well, that person didn't react when I sent a nasty email. Now I know I can send nasty emails to that person and they won't react. So over time, the bully sends, more nasty emails, or they do things more and more pervasive. It's more and more aggressive. It's more and more frequent. And the relationship unfolds like a crescendo where there's this initial incident, and then over time, the power imbalance grows and grows and grows. And eventually, the target comes to realize, wow, this person has power over me, and the bully comes to realize I have power over that person. So psychological power imbalance is a real key component to the definition of workplace bullying. Finally, the third component is that bullying obviously causes harm to targets and witnesses. So people who feel bullied, people at the receiving end of those behaviors, are anxious, depressed, they're not sleeping, they're stressed out, they're probably not eating very well, so they're experiencing some psychological damage as a result of what's happening to them at work. And it's no secret that stress causes physical problems, so that stress obviously manifests into physical problems as well: headaches, heartache, people, actually lots and lots and lots of research pointing to PTSD as a result of workplace bullying. So, you know, it certainly is very traumatizing for people who experience bullying. But I also wanted to be clear that witnesses also experience some of these same things. So even if you don't necessarily self-identify as someone who's being bullied, if you're at work every day watching it happen, it bothers you. You feel stressed out. You feel scared that you're next. You know, you're walking on eggshells. You know, you're stressed, and that causes you some physical problems. So it's not just something that happens between bullies and targets. You know, bullying is a social phenomenon, and everybody who's around the bully is experiencing damage of some kind. So what are bullying behaviors? Now, I like to break bullying behaviors down into 3 different buckets, and any workplace bullying survey that looks at workplace bullying in organizations, if you categorize the behaviors, or any lists that you may have seen online that lays out what bullying behaviors are, they all ultimately fit within these 3 buckets. So I feel confident saying that these 3 buckets are sort of the definitive bullying behaviors, or the definitive list of bullying behaviors. So the first bucket of behavior is aggressive communication. So insulting people, making snide comments, yelling, angry outbursts, getting in someone's personal space, sort of like harsh finger pointing, nasty emails, you know, pointing fingers at someone in a harsh way. So all of this stuff, you know, it's aggressive communication. It's things that you can see. So a couple of examples, I've definitely received a lot of calls for coaching people who, you know, just ultimately seem to have a temper problem, and they yell and they freak out when things don't go their way, and they make people afraid. And so that's one example. In another example, I was an expert witness on a court case against a very large retailer. And in that scenario, the bully would kind of cower over people and back them into a corner. And actually, he crossed over into violence every now and again, because if he felt like you were backing too far away, or he didn't like that you were backing away from him, he'd fishhook you in the nose. So he'd literally stick his finger in people's noses to keep them near him while he cowered over them. So how easily the bullying has now crossed over into violence. The next bucket of behavior is humiliation. So teasing someone, showing pictures or videos that violate someone's values, spreading rumors, ignoring people, playing jokes, taunting with social media, publicly pointing out mistakes is a big one that I hear, outcasting a person. So doing things that leave someone feeling humiliated and socially isolated. One example of that, I worked with a company where hazing was the problem. So they were an organization mostly of men, and it was they were mechanics, and the more tenured employees, the people who had been there for a long time, would definitely make life uncomfortable for the new employees, and the new employees really had to sort of prove themselves, and hazing is not okay, and it was definitely causing a lot of turnover in new employees. The third bucket is manipulation. So this bucket is what makes workplace bullying the hardest to spot, and it makes workplace bullying hard to understand sometimes, because these are passive aggressive behaviors, behaviors that ultimately, if called out, the bully could sort of say, well, I had to do that because. So things like removing tasks imperative to a person's job responsibilities without any explanation, sort of punitively doing that, assigning tasks that are too far above someone's competency or too far below their competency. And again, you know, that's something that's normal. We all do things at work that are beneath us or beneath our competency level. We all have to do that. But if somebody is consistently doing that to you, and you never get to do stuff that's at your own competency level, then that's where we're looking at bullying. Giving unmanageable workloads, changing tasks so often that people are confused, hiding things from people or not communicating information that they need, holding people accountable to scores or to quality products that are far, far above kind of the standard score. So these are all things that are manipulation. A couple of examples of that. One, I worked with a woman who worked in a situation where everybody in her office had case files, and everyone in the office had 30 case files, and she was given 60 case files. So she had double the work. And this was given to her under the premise of, it was a new manager who came in and basically said, I'm going to give you all of this work because I know you can do it. You've been here the longest. You can handle it. And the woman basically said, no, I can't. This is double the work. I've been doing this for a long time. I know that 60 cases is way too much. And the manager said, nope, you've got to do it. Sorry. And so then after a while, she tried to do it, realized she was failing. She went back to her manager and said, look, I'm telling you, I can't do this. I'm failing. I need help. Can I farm out some of the cases or get an assistant or work overtime or something? I'm telling you, I'm failing at this. I can't do it. It's double the work. And the manager said no. And then her performance evaluation time came around, and it said on her performance evaluation that she was a poor performer. She was unable to keep up with the demands of her work, and she was being recommended for a demotion. So that's an example of manipulation, and that was combined with lots of other things like nasty emails, pointing out mistakes, angry outbursts and things. So, combine all of that, and it definitely was a case of workplace bullying. So I'm just going to reach out to you, and I'm just curious, are these buckets familiar to you? Do they resonate with you? Does this sound familiar? How are we doing? Okay, I've got one yes with an exclamation point. Other comments? Would love to hear how this is resonating with you. Okay, lots of yeses with exclamations, particularly manipulation. Definitely have seen some of these behaviors. Okay. One person says they've experienced these behaviors themselves, so I'm sorry to hear that. I know going through it myself, that's a really hard experience to go through. Abusive emails. Okay. Okay, a few people on here have experienced workplace bullying. I know it's really hard to go through, so I appreciate you coming on to learn more about your situation, and I'm happy to talk with you after if you want to go over some tips outside of this webinar. Okay, so someone says when it's a senior person, they've gotten away with it for so long, what do you do? So the answer to that question is that you have to get the CEO on board to solving that person's behavior, and we'll talk about that as one of the steps. So I will definitely address the answer to that question. What about losing your voice during manipulation? Yeah, so, and that's an example of why workplace bullying is so hard to go through, and why it's so hard to explain to other people what it's like. So if you're being manipulated, how do you express that to people? And you really do lose your voice, and it takes a toll on you, and it hurts you physically and mentally and psychologically and in every way possible. And so you absolutely lose your voice. I've heard lots of stories of people who have literally just lost their dignity. And actually one woman, she was commenting that she could not get a job moving forward because she felt so damaged. And she ended up having to work at Target. And she kind of joked, now I have a target on my back, look at that. So I know it's hard. What if the senior person treats the CEO the same way and refuses to do anything about it? Let me think about that for a second. That was my situation. So when I worked where there was a workplace bully, this person definitely bullied the president as well. And that was why the president always reacted with, just let it be the bigger person. And ultimately what I realized is that the CEO had conflict avoidant issues. He wasn't interested in speaking up to this person. And so my pleas for help were falling on deaf ears because he was never going to fix this person. He was never going to talk about it because he himself was being bullied. And just one example of that, I remember we'd get our performance evaluations in October. So us directors would give our performance evaluations to our employees. We'd turn them all into the CEO or the president, and then he would give us directors our performance evaluations. And he would put off giving the performance evaluation to this person who was also a director, and we'd all get hours in October, and then November would go by, December would go by, January would go by, and as the HR person, I'm saying you have to give him his performance evaluation, and he wouldn't, because he knew what he needed to say in that performance evaluation and he didn't want to say it. And in fact, he would take the person out to lunch when he gave his performance evaluation, because he didn't, I think he felt safer in public place. So now this guy was kind of being rewarded. So in the end, I hate to say it, but if the CEO is not willing to address the bullying because they themselves are being bullied, you may need to consider other options, and I'll just leave it at that. I have documented and advised seems to always be an excuse. Not sure why the CEO is rejecting that this person is toxic. Manipulation is so hard to identify. How do you call it out without being paranoid? Sometimes difficult to get senior management buy-in when the offender is a heavy hitter. Okay, so I'm trying to address all of these comments quickly and kind of all at one time. So yes, it is hard to get senior management buy-in, and one of my steps will address that. I will give you information exactly how to get your senior management on board. So hang on to that question. Manipulation is hard to identify. How do you call it out without being paranoid? The answer is that you keep documentation, and that if there's any kind of emails or anything going around, it's documentation, documentation, documentation. And if it's a bunch of behaviors over time, you'll be able to make a case for the fact that you're being bullied. Okay, and then I had a question, whatever happened to the bully I worked with? I don't know. The company I worked for closed down about a couple years after I left, and I don't know where that person is now. Probably off bullying some other group of people. Okay, so I'm going to move forward and continue, please, by all means, to ask questions as we go through. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let's see, any tips to coach leaders who avoid conflict issues with their direct report leaders? Tips to coaching leaders who avoid conflict issues. So those people probably need an executive coach, somebody who can teach them how to communicate successfully, and ultimately that's a leadership executive coach, and that's what executive coaches do, teach executives how to be better leaders, and part of that would be communication and not being conflict avoidant and instead speaking up. So that would be the answer, is you may want to find, and I do actually have some references for you. If you want to shoot me an email, I will be able to give you some names of some coaches that you can speak to. Okay, so let's talk about bullying versus harassment. So you have that in your workbook. There is a kind of a long list, or a real detailed list of the differences, so I'll go through this briefly. So in terms of things they have in common, ultimately the behaviors are the same. If you look at any sort of harassment court case and what happened during that harassment court case, you will find bullying behaviors, and there are court cases on harassment all over the internet. So as I said, bullying is about aggressive communication, humiliation, and manipulation, and ultimately harassment is about those same things. So the behaviors are relatively the same. Next, psychological power imbalance. So there's a caveat here. Workplace bullying definitions always talk about a psychological power imbalance. It's a huge part of the definition. Harassment, we don't really ever talk about a psychological power imbalance. So there isn't, that's not part of the definition. If you were to try to sue for harassment in court, you wouldn't have to prove that there was a psychological power imbalance. But I still say that these are something that these two things have in common, because in the end, if somebody's harassed because of their race or religion or gender or sexual orientation or whatever it is, that ultimately that would leave someone feeling like there was a power imbalance. So I'm going to say that these two things are definitely connected, or definitely something they have in common. Perpetrator. So in terms of harassment, the law makes it very clear that anybody can be a perpetrator and that employers are responsible for even vendors who engage in sexual harassment or discrimination or harassment because of protected category. In workplace bullying, the focus is usually on, is it a manager or a supervisor? And yes, most often the bullying is coming from a manager. 70% of the time, workplace bullying is coming from a manager, but 30% of the time the bullying is either peer-to-peer or, like in my situation and some of the situations I'm seeing through your questions, the bully is sort of bullying up. So in the end, the perpetrator can really be anybody. And as we see with cyberbullying, perpetrators can even be complete and total strangers online posting nasty things. In terms of repetition, this is absolutely something these two things have in common. So harassment is defined with the word pervasive, that the behavior has to be pervasive in order for it to be harassment. So one-time offense is not harassment necessarily, or you couldn't sue for a one-time offense regarding harassment. However, if the behavior is particularly egregious, then you could sue. So, you know, if the sexual harassment incident or the harassment incident is so terrible in that one-time scenario, then yes, you could sue for that. And the same is for bullying. So you always see repetition in the definition of workplace bullying, and everyone agrees that generally it's got to be pervasive and repeated and ongoing, but that there could be scenarios where it was so egregious in one situation that that would count as bullying. So that's something they definitely have in common. So protected category, if you've got your workbook, put a star by this. This is the one real major defining factor between workplace bullying and harassment. So in the end, the behaviors are the same, but when the behaviors are aimed at somebody because they are part of a protected category, then it's harassment, it's illegal, and you can sue for it. If it's equal opportunity harassment, or the harassment is not aimed at someone because of a protected category, then we call that bullying, and that is not illegal. But let me give you an example of how quickly this can cross over. So for those of you who are looking for a business case to ensure that your CEOs are on board with solving bullying, let me share how quickly we can cross over. So I did give you the one example of the guy who was using aggressive communication, and then he would cross into workplace violence by sticking his finger in people's noses. Once there's touching, that's definitely violence. Another example, actually, I had somebody call me a few weeks ago who was looking for coaching, and this was a guy who worked in an IT company, and he'd been there since the 70s, and so he was just this really well-respected guy in the industry, and had been there forever. And so, of course, it's not that easy to just say, you're bullying people, you got to go. His behavior was allowed and allowed and allowed, and over time it's gotten worse and worse and worse and scarier and scarier and scarier. And so this person was telling me that she was looking for coaching. Finally, I asked her, what's the driver? Why now? Why are you looking for coaching? And she said, he yelled so much at someone and was freaking out so much over this person and cussing, and was just so scary to this person that the person at the receiving end of this behavior was literally so scared that his tongue swelled up and he literally could not talk. So he actually told some of his friends that he worked with later, during that scenario, I was so scared I literally couldn't talk. I've never been scared frozen is really what had happened. And those friends actually reported that to HR. So the guy himself didn't, and the friends came to HR and said, I hate to violate this guy's trust in me, but I got to tell you what happened, and it's got to be solved. Another example, more famous, is the Martin Incognito case with the Miami Dolphins. So Martin was a rookie player on the Miami Dolphins. Incognito had been playing for a long time, and Incognito was harassing Martin or bullying Martin. So if you read the investigation report, which is a pretty interesting read if you have time, I told you I'm obsessed with bullying, so I read all kinds of things like that. It's like a 60-page report. Martin was receiving crazy bullying text messages. They were not illegal text messages. They were bullying. They were not focused on a protected category. They were just mean. They were bullying. They were legal text messages. 3,000 text messages were sent. However, incognito crossed the line just a handful of times. So out of those 3,000 text messages, only a handful had racial slurs, and a couple of them made sexual comments about Martin's sister. So now we've crossed into sexual harassment and harassment because of race. So how easy we cross over. So now all of a sudden, all 3,000 text messages are illegal because of this handful of text messages. So it's so easy for the lines to be blurred to go from something that's illegal into something that is illegal. So that's a business case. That if your CEO says, well, bullying is not illegal, you know, the only reason we do harassment training is because we have to. You can say, well, it crosses over pretty easily, and we need to make sure that neither of these things are happening. Something else they do not have in common is intent. So regarding harassment, nothing in the law requires that you prove intent. There's nothing about malice in the law. In fact, the law very clearly states, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, that's the government agency that handles harassment complaints, they make it very clear on their website that it doesn't have to be intentional. It still counts as harassment. Regarding bullying, we're still up in the air. So I would say about half of us experts in bullying do think bullying is intentional, and half of us don't think it's intentional. We don't really know. There is only a little bit of research on workplace bullies, and what research there is seems to show that people don't intend to be so mean. So people who are identified as bullies, when you talk with them, they'll say things like, I know that people see me as a hard manager, or yeah, I hold people accountable, or yeah, I made that person cry that one day, but they don't see just how bad it is. And then when there's a 360-degree review around them and they're given this information, this is how people really see you, they're often pretty shocked. So it's looking like bullying is not necessarily intentional, but there is not a ton of research on bullies, and that's because it's hard to find people who are willing to stand up and say, yep, I'm a bully, I'll participate in your survey. And then finally, subjectivity. So regarding harassment, you don't have to prove that you were harmed. So if you were going to sue over harassment, you don't have to prove that you were harmed in order to prove that there was harassment. You just have to prove that these behaviors happened. Now, if you're looking for damages, you'd have to prove that there was harm and how much that harm cost you in order to get those damages. But in terms of proving that harassment was a real thing and it really happened to you, you don't have to prove that you were harmed by it. Regarding workplace bullying, all of the definitions always seem to really focus on the fact that bullying causes harm. So interesting that with harassment, we don't focus on power imbalance and we don't focus on harm, but with workplace bullying, we really do focus on those things. So one final comment on defining bullying, and then I'll move into the 10 steps that I promised you. So what I want you to understand is that bullying is a social phenomenon. It does not happen in a vacuum. So of course we do have the workplace bully. What kinds of factors do you think a bully brings to the table, or what personality characteristics does a bully bring to the table? What do you think? I'm interested to hear from you. What makes someone a bully? Why are they bullies? Okay, insecure, and they're trying to cover that up. Absolutely. Maybe they're afraid of something. They're dominant, so they're a type A kind of a person. They have a know-it-all kind of an attitude. They have a Machiavellian personality. And I'm with you. I'm not sure that I could spell Machiavellian either. What else? What else? What other? They were raised by a bully, so they've learned to bully over time from other people. Maybe they themselves aren't doing their job, so they're deflecting that onto other people. They cover up their insecurity with appearance of confidence. That is very true. Absolutely. They want to appear in control, so they use their power to say, I'm in control here. They've been a bully all of their lives. So you're all right on. So absolutely, bullying is a learned skill. So what happens is that people who have experienced bullying, often either because they were around bullies themselves because of their parents, or maybe they themselves were bullied, they start to figure out that you can get your needs met by being a bully. And so they learn that this is how they can function and get what they need, and therefore they might become bullies themselves because they're seeing that it works. One example, people send me bullying stuff all of the time, whether it's regarding the workplace or with students. And actually, there's a story that someone had sent me where one student in high school was bullying another student, and the principal couldn't seem to solve this problem, so he finally called in the parents and said, we need to have a meeting. And so when the two parents arrived in the parking lot, the father of the bully punched the father of the target. And so, this was in the news because it was like clearly this kid who was the bully had learned that from his father. Bullies also lack social and emotional intelligence, so they're lacking social awareness, they lack empathy, they lack the ability to see facial expressions and really fully understand the consequences of their behavior. Indeed, they do lack confidence, they feel threatened. So what we find often is that targets and bullies have this relationship where the target is a high performer, they're well liked, they're doing their job, and the bully is threatened by that for some reason, either because they themselves are not doing their job, or they're narcissistic. They see themselves as so amazing that they're perceiving the people around them as not so amazing, and that feels threatening for them, where they're kind of like, how come people aren't as great as I am? They're not working as many hours as I am, or they're not bringing in as much money as I am, and that feels threatening for them as well. So they're sort of lashing out. And so targets, on the other hand, we don't know a lot about people who are targeted. So we certainly don't want to blame targets. I certainly recognize that, it wasn't necessarily my fault when I was being bullied, and I'm not suggesting that. But I do want to point out that this is a relationship. So the target does play some role in the bullying in some way. What we do know about targets for sure, research seems to find over and over again, is that they are indeed good performers, and that's likely why they're being bullied. And for whatever reason in the scenario at work, they're not able to stand up for themselves. So targets may stand up for themselves in all kinds of other scenarios, but for some reason in interactions with the bully, they're not standing up. And of course, this is a relationship of power and balance, as I mentioned. So the bully and the target come to understand that their relationship is made up of power and balance. Now, this is a social phenomenon, though, so it goes beyond the bully and the target. So organizational members play a role in the bullying. So you have people who witness the bullying, you have people who see it going on, and for whatever reason, they don't step in. You have people who are on the bully side. Maybe they egg the bully on. They maybe have, you have targets, advocates, people on the target side who, are there sort of serving as ad hoc counselors. And you have everything in between. So you have people who play certain roles in the bullying scenario, but ultimately they're all reinforcers. So if somebody sees bullying and they're not standing up either in the moment to the bully, or they're not taking it to management, then they're reinforcing. Now, my colleagues use the word bystanders, that witnesses are bystanders. I disagree with that word. Bystander sounds like you're an innocent passerby, like you happened to witness a car accident and there was nothing you could do. And that's right. There isn't anything you can do when there's a car accident, or you can't stop a car accident. And so that makes you a bystander. But in workplace bullying, you do have a choice. You're making a cognitive decision not to speak up, and that makes you a reinforcer if you're somebody who's witnessing this behavior. On the flip side, and the organizational members are therefore supporting the bully and damaging the target because they're allowing it to happen. So on the other side, we do have the organization itself that plays a role in the workplace bullying. So what kinds of organizational factors do you think come into play? What kinds of things that allow bullying to thrive in an organization? And while you're answering, I'm going to read some of these comments I've been getting. All right, so I want to be getting some answers on what kinds of things play a role in the bullying when it comes to the organization. And one person says, it's frustrating as an HR person when the targets won't speak up or speak out. So now it looks like you're the one with the issue. And that's a great point, that HR actually gets a real bad rap online. If you Google workplace bullying and human resources, you'll find that a lot of people say HR wasn't on my side, they wouldn't help me. But often HR, in my experience, that's my clientele, that's who I'm working with is HR, that's just not the case. HR really does want to solve the problem, but they're not getting what they need to solve it, either from the targets or from leadership. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, in terms of organizational norms, we have lack of leadership. So people just don't do anything about it. A military and paramilitary culture. Sure, absolutely. Bullying is a longtime employee and they get moody when they're called on their actions. In my situation, the CEO was meek, soft-spoken, and the bully was directly under him. So, yep, that absolutely. So we're talking about kind of a weak leadership scenario. Dismissing the behavior as personality, so looking the other way. HR says there's nothing they can do because this person will never change. And that's a totally incorrect statement. So that's HR feeling helpless. HR saying there's nothing they can do, and that's inaccurate. Absolutely, there's a lot HR can do, and we can definitely talk offline about that if you want some advice there. HR may not have leadership support to solve the issues. And that was my scenario. When I was dealing with the workplace bullying situation, I talked to the president about it. I would get complaints about bullying and I would take them to the president and he wouldn't do anything. So absolutely, I'm with you on that. Need for less formal response than HR, culture of fear. Witnesses are glad that they're not being bullied, so they don't want to speak up. That's right. People aren't going to say stuff if they might be next when they do. Strategic bully, they act one way with employees and another way with the CEO. Absolutely, 100%. They know how to behave and when. Cultures that elevate rainmakers as superheroes, regardless of their behaviors. That's a great point, too. The bully is a high performer and the management doesn't want to address it. The bully's boss supports the bully's behaviors. Yeah, so I hate to say it, but what you're all saying is ultimately weak leadership, I say with air quotes. We're talking about an organization where the CEO or the C-suite is not willing to put their foot down and say, you can't act this way anymore. I don't care how much money you bring in, you're damaging the rest of my organization. And so when we talk about presenting your case to the C-suite, I'll just say that, one way to do that is to say, look, this person might bring in X amount of dollars, but they're costing us X amount of dollars. And so now they're not bringing in everything you're saying they're bringing in. So that's definitely one way to go about it. Some other organizational factors that play a role in bullying. You've got high competition. So, high sales or where you have to bring in a certain quota or you're out kind of a thing, or where the bonus for the top players is a big deal. Organizations where you have a lot of employees who have worked there for a long time allows bullying to happen because you have people who've been there for a long time sort of up against the newcomers. You have organizations where there's a lot of smart people. So healthcare, for example, is one place where bullying really thrives because you have people who have been in the industry for a long time and a lot of very smart people who have been in the industry for a long time. So yeah, and when the organization is going through change, that's another example of an organizational norm. So there's a lot of things that the organization itself is bringing to the table to allow bullying. And again, the organization is supporting the bully by having this kind of a culture, and that damages the target. And what's so fascinating is that although everybody around the bully is supporting the bullying behaviors, either by not speaking up, or because of the culture itself, the bully is damaging the members and damaging the organization. So, and this very point is what fascinated me about workplace bullying when I started writing my paper. I wanted to understand why there were so many of us in this organization that allowed one person to act that way. And that was sort of the key thing I was trying to get at, and I still haven't found an answer. So before I move into my 10 steps, a final comment on my methodology so you understand my 10 steps. So there's a great book by a gentleman named Kim Cameron. He's a positive psychology guy, and he's written a book called Positive Leadership. And in that book, he talks about this wonderful metaphor, which is that people grow towards the light. People thrive in the sunshine. They thrive in areas where they're able to grow. We do not thrive in dark, caves with bugs and monsters. We thrive in the sunshine. And that's the kind of metaphor that I want you to be thinking about moving forward when you're thinking about how to solve bullying. And here's another sort of business case, something to bring to your C-suite. When you have a civil and safe workplace, you have people who are communicating with each other and they have good relationships. So if I'm afraid of someone, I'm not communicating with them. And when I value someone and respect them, even if I don't necessarily like them, but they treat me with respect, then I will communicate with them. And when people are communicating and building relationships, then they're making better decisions, they're more innovative, and they're learning. I can't learn in an environment where I'm afraid. I can't be innovative in an environment where I'm afraid to share my wacky idea that just might work. And I'm not making good decisions if I'm afraid. So we don't function well in situations where we're afraid, when we're in a dark cave. If people are making good decisions, they're allowed to be innovative and they're feeling challenged and like they're learning every day at work, then they're engaged and they're motivated, which means that they're coming to work. And when they're at work, they're producing and they're offering good customer service, they're meeting goals, and they're receiving bottom line results. So let me give you a couple factoids. One is that the Canadian Safety Council found that when people feel bullied, they spend 52% of their day talking about it. Over half their day is wasted. Talk about reduced productivity. Another factoid, one research study found that people who feel bullied call in sick 10 more days. So you probably have some people who feel bullied who have used up their vacation and sick time and now they're into negative because they don't want to come to work. So lost attendance. So, having a civil workplace is ultimately 100% attached to your bottom line. And if your C-suite is focused on money, then this is one way to get there. So let's move into talking about the 10 steps. The first 2 steps go hand in hand. You have to get leadership on board, and one way to do that is through something called a prevalence audit. So let's talk through this. So as we've just identified, when the leaders allow the bullying to happen, then it happens. So you've got to figure out a way to get your leaders to say, this can't happen anymore. And so absolutely step number 1 to any organizational change is that leaders have to be on board with that. Well, let's move into step 2 and talk about the prevalence audit. So you absolutely can prove to the C-suite that there is a problem and that it's costing you something. So let me give you an example. I had a company call me. They were a manufacturing plant and they were out in the middle of nowhere. And so people would graduate from high school and they'd go and get a job at this manufacturing plant and then they'd work there forever. And so they had very low turnover because there wasn't a lot of options and also because it was a good place to work. People actually liked working there. The CEO was kind of this like teddy bear guy that everybody loved, talked about the family culture, so it was a good place to work. However, they hired an intern who was going to college for engineering. He worked his way up over time and became the director of operations. Now this intern is a bully and he's got power and he's really going to use it. And he manages the operations. This company made aluminum powder and aluminum spheres. Apparently they use that in aerospace. So now he has a control over the entire organization. He's controlling what they're selling, right? And so people are complaining about the workplace bullying to the CFO. The CFO is the HR person at this organization. It's a small manufacturing plant. And so the CFO is getting these complaints. He's going to the CEO, and like many of you, the CEO is saying, it's not that big of a deal. I don't know why it's a problem. I think the CEO also was conflict avoidant, wasn't interested in addressing it. Why can't we all just get along? He would say all the time. And so the CFO found me online, and he calls and tells me this predicament. I've got this issue. The CEO won't solve it. And so I said, well, let's do an audit. Let's prove to the CEO that it's a problem. And so Okay, so this is a very low-cost scenario. The CFO goes back to the CEO and says, we're going to do this very cost-effective survey. It'll just take up a little bit of time, and let me prove to you that bullying is a problem. If it is a problem, won't it be great that we can solve it? If it's not a problem, like you say, then I'll drop it and you'll never hear me talk about it again. So the CEO says, okay, sounds good. So we did the audit, and we discovered that, yes, people absolutely felt bullied. And here was the kicker that got the CEO's attention. Remember I said this company had low turnover. Over half of the organization had been looking for another job because of the bully. Do you think we got the CEO's attention? And actually, I was just speaking at the HR conference, the Society for Human Resources, and I was talking to another speaker, and he was talking about the all of a sudden syndrome that CEOs experience. So, you know, CEOs function by looking at a dashboard. They're like a pilot. They look at the dashboard, everything looks good. Why solve bullying if our sales are meeting their quota and things look okay? But then all of a sudden, there's, you know, no gas left and the plane's going down, and that's what was happening here. All of a sudden, so if we hadn't done the audit, the CEO would have been in a world of hurt when all of a sudden people started dropping like flies. So we were able to get the CEO's attention. We also learned some other really great things. So here's the key to doing an audit. We didn't ask about the bullying. I never asked anybody, do you feel bullied? What I asked was, what's your relationship like with your boss or with this department or that department? Do you get the information you need to do your job well? Do you feel respected and valued? When you give out ideas, do you feel like they're taken in? And so I was asking questions about communication, because bullying is about communication and relationships. So that's what I asked about. And I was able to discover some great information to prove to the CEO that we needed to solve the problem. And I also discovered some other information that we could address. So I discovered, for example, that the project manager for maintenance wasn't a very good project manager. The maintenance department was having a hard time completing their maintenance projects. I learned that the sales process was off and it wasn't quite right. So we were able to fix that. So I learned all kinds of good things. And so do a prevalence audit. So if your boss is saying this isn't a big deal, ask people about it. And just ask them, do you get what you need? You know, are you able to function? Are you able to do your job? And see what the answers are. And then you take that data back to the CEO and say, look, this person is causing a problem. Your dashboard might look good, but I'm telling you there's a problem underneath the surface. So those are the first two steps. The third step is to implement a healthy workplace policy. So a healthy workplace policy is not an anti-bullying policy. Notice it does not say anti-bullying policy. So here's what I want you to do. Here's an exercise. Now, even if you can't implement a policy at your organization, you can do the exercise. So I want you to get your notepad out. Here's what you're going to do. The next time you have a staff meeting, you're going to ask your employees, how do you want to be treated by the people around you? A prevalence audit. Greg asked me what kind of audit did I say? A prevalence audit. Okay, so you're going to ask people, how do you want to be treated by your peers and managers? That's the question. How do you want to be treated by your peers and managers? And give them 15 minutes to brainstorm that. Let them, you know, come up with some ideas. Break them up into groups of 3 or 4. Give them some time to think it through. And then you'll collect the answers. The key to doing this exercise is that you have to write their answers on a whiteboard where everybody can see, or you have to, I often will type them into a Word document that's projected on the screen so that people can see that they all want to be treated the same, and that you can literally feel the room temperature change when people realize, oh my gosh, everybody wants to be treated the same. And then what you do is you take those behaviors and you put them in your healthy workplace policy. And now you've defined what a healthy workplace looks like using behaviors that your employees gave you. So this is a great way to get buy-in to having this policy, and especially, you know, employees never get to participate in creating corporate policies. So this is a great way to say, I'm interested in collaborating to solve the problem. Now, I have a template policy. If you don't have that from me already, email me and I'll send it to you. And it does address workplace bullying. It does define workplace bullying later. But going back to my metaphor about people growing towards the light, if I have an anti-bullying policy that just lists all of the things you're not supposed to do, then it leaves people going, well, what am I supposed to do instead? I've always manipulated other people. I'm just kidding. But you have to give people information about what they should be doing in addition to what they should not be doing. And I love this quote, people can't do a don't. So you can't just say, don't do this. You have to tell them what to do instead. And this exercise allows you to do that. So again, even if you don't have the power to implement a policy in your organization because you're not in HR, or a C-suite person, you absolutely can do this exercise within your own department as a way to start kicking off a new kind of a culture. Step 4 is to create vision and values. So you have a corporate vision. Your organization has a vision. That vision is on your website. Maybe it's hanging on the wall in your lunchroom, and it's a vision about where your organization is trying to go. I recommend you create a social vision, which is focused on where your culture is trying to go. So this is in addition to the vision that you already have for your organization. You want to create a social vision about the culture itself, and then that social vision is a guiding light for what you're trying to get to, and it eliminates bullying. Let me give you some examples. You may have seen Method. They're in Target, and they may be other places, but I know they're for sure in Target. Method creates cleaning products and they do not use bleach and that kind of stuff. It's all sort of all natural. It's all about the environment. And they're innovative, right? They're scientists. They have to come up with innovative ways to create cleaning products that don't use things like bleach, and their packaging has to be innovative because they want to be seen. So this is their social statement or their social vision. And what you could do is if you Google Method Humanifesto, they have sort of like a Bill of Rights, and you can find it online pretty easily if you want to look at it. And the Bill of Rights is written weird. It's not like, here's our Bill of Rights, item 1, item 2, item 3. Instead, the font changes size throughout the document. It's kind of written all off. The justification, or the which side it's justified on is off. It's a sort of a weird looking document. And in big, bold letters right in the middle of this Humanifesto are these words: weirdliness is next to godliness. What Method is saying is you have to be weird to work here. And in fact, they even ask about being weird in their interviews. So if you interview at Method, they're going to ask you, are you weird? How so, and how will you keep it weird? And so their social vision is about being weird. Does that keep bullying out? Absolutely. Everything Method focuses on is on being weird, and that guides everything they do. And if somebody is bullying at Method, it would hinder other people's ability to be weird. People can't be weird, they can't be themselves if there's a bully around. So the bully would stand out like a sore thumb and it would be squashed. You can't act that way because it goes against our social vision. So this is one example of a social vision that ultimately would keep bullies out, as well as a lot of other bad behaviors. Another example, Southwest Airlines, they win a ton of awards for having a great place to work and for customer service. They have 3 value statements, or 3 sort of social visions: warrior spirit, servant's heart, and a fun-loving attitude. 2 out of the 3 absolutely go against bullying, and maybe even warrior spirit does too. But if I'm a bully at Southwest, all someone has to do is say, hey, Catherine's going against being a servant's heart or having a servant's heart, and she's definitely does not have a fun-loving attitude, and I'm out of there. Southwest takes that very seriously. So again, you have value statements that drive people's behavior, and that's what a lot of organizations miss. Their C-suite creates these value statements because they think they have to, and they put them on the website, and then 20 years goes by, nobody's living by those values, nobody even knows what they are, nobody's being held accountable to them. They're just words. But you absolutely can use your vision and your values to create a workplace free of bullying. So here's an example of how I did this with one of my clients. So this was an organization that created an environment for their community so that people with disabilities could thrive. So they worked with clients, people with disabilities, to help those people thrive as much as they could, whether it meant a part-time job or a full-time job or even just getting out for a walk once in a while so they could greet their neighbors. Whatever it meant for that person, that's what they were focused on, helping this person thrive. And with so much bullying going on inside their organization, they had an executive director who was a bully, and that person had created a culture of bullying. And so the board actually got rid of him and brought in a new executive director, and she was like, we got to change this culture. And so together with a committee, we came up with the word thrive, and thrive became their social vision. Now everything that we do around this business, every decision we make, every behavior we engage in has to be focused on thriving. And that was created through a committee. So you yourself can create a committee and create a social vision. And then from there, you create your value statements and some action items. So get a committee together, figure out your social vision, and then figure out what you need to do with your corporate values. Now, if you have corporate values and nobody's living by them, get rid of them. Start over. If you have values that could just be tweaked, that works too, but you create your values through that exercise. So the exercise where I said ask people how they want to be treated, and you put that in your corporate policy, you can use that same information to create your values. And now your values are values that your employees said, I want to live by. So you'll get more buy-in. So that moves us up to step 5, which is to develop action items. So often, again, organizations have core values and they mean nothing. They're on a website and maybe they hang on a wall somewhere and that's it. You have to develop action items around those values so that people constantly are living the values. So I love this quote. It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. So here's what's going on. If you have workplace bullying, people think it's normal. They may not like it, but it's kind of normal for them. That's the way their life is. So you have to push on their actions to get them to think differently. And same with bullies themselves. They think their behavior is okay because that's what everybody's been telling them, that it's okay. Nobody's been standing up to them, so they think it's okay. You have to push on their actions and create cognitive dissonance for them. So if I'm feeling like bullying is normal and that's what I think, and I'm starting to be forced to act in a way that's not bullying and I'm being forced to act in a more positive way, I develop cognitive dissonance and I have to figure out a way to resolve that cognitive dissonance, and the only way to resolve it is to think differently. So cognitive dissonance happens when your mind and your body don't match, your brain and your actions don't match. Guilt is an example of cognitive dissonance. You feel guilty because you did something, your mind told you it wasn't okay, and now you feel guilty about it. Turns out cognitive dissonance makes us very uncomfortable. Guilt is a very uncomfortable feeling, and you'll do whatever you can to resolve the guilt, whether by talking yourself into saying that it was okay that you did that, or by apologizing with your actions. So we figure out ways to relieve the cognitive dissonance. And so that's what this quote is about. Create cognitive dissonance for people who think bullying is okay by changing their actions. And their only option left is to then change the way they think. You have to create SMART goals for your action items. You know, you can't just put a bunch of things out there and hope people do them. They've got to be SMART, and you've, I'm sure, seen this before. The goals have to be specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-focused. So let me give you some examples of what these SMART goals might look like. Now, again, even if you're a supervisor listening in right now and you don't necessarily have the power to create new corporate values and implement a whole corporate-wide strategic plan, you can absolutely do the examples I'm going to provide right now. So one example, starting this Friday, hold brainstorming sessions on every Friday to collect ideas for projects. So you can sit down with your team and say, what are we going to do to start creating a more healthy workplace? And you can just come up with ideas. So this might be one of your SMART goals. Another example of a SMART goal is that you can start your staff meetings off with thank you. So here's how that works. Next time you have a staff meeting, you just say, I'd like to open the staff meeting up with thank you. Who wants to go? And everybody will kind of look around and think to themselves, what the heck are they talking about? I don't say thank you. What do you mean? And there'll be some silence, but after a while, somebody will eventually speak up, and they'll say something like, all right, well, I'll say thank you to Kathy. She's always in a really great mood, and I really appreciate that. So thanks, Kathy. And then someone else will say, all right, well, thanks, John. You helped me yesterday with that project I was working on, and I really appreciated it. So thank you. And all it does is sort of adjust the tone of the meeting, but it makes a huge difference to start off with thank you. People start to realize that they're appreciated. And so this is a small step to changing the way people think. Another example, create and obtain personal pledges for positive communication. So you can write a pledge out for people to follow and ask them to sign it, just as a way to sort of solidify that we're making a change. At a staff meeting, you can hold an open discussion about anything. My example is giving feedback, but one way to start pushing on your culture is to start talking about what people want from each other. Some people like to get feedback, for example, in a very direct manner. Other people don't want to get feedback that way. So you can have conversations about what does feedback look like. I sent out a job aid a while ago in my e-newsletter. If you don't have it, email me and I'll send it. But you can do a conversation about being professional. And so I sent out a job aid about how to have that conversation. So there's all kinds of topics. So you could just sort of facilitate these open conversations about positive workplace practices. Another example, within 60 days, visit a company that's been a best place to work and talk to them about why they're best place to work and what they do. You could do something called the best self exercise. This exercise also comes from Kim Cameron, and what he suggests, and I've actually done this myself when I was on a board of directors, and it was a really refreshing exercise. Send an email out to all of your staff with the names of all of your staff members. And in your email, you'll say, below is a list of your staff members or your team members. Next to each person's name, I want you to write down one thing that makes them great. One thing that you appreciate them, one thing that you enjoy about them, whatever it is. And then you'll collect these emails with a list of things that people like about each other. And you'll then consolidate the list. So if John is one of your employees, you'll put all of John's items on one piece of paper. You'll put all of Kathy's items on one paper. You'll put all of Susan's items on one paper. And then you hold a staff meeting and you announce what you collected. So you'll say, all right, John, here's what everybody said about you. And here's the piece of paper. Now John has something to take back to his cubicle or his office and put it on the wall. And then you say, all right, Susan, here's what everybody said about you. Here's the paper. And now Susan has something to put on her wall. How powerful is that to have something on your wall that says, this is what people appreciate in me? Another example, create a lunch and learn schedule. Get departments to do the training. So it doesn't have to be some big expensive training program that costs you millions of dollars. Ask people inside your organization to create the trainings. And now they're engaging in teamwork and they're learning something in creating the training. Another example, start a wall of fame. So one thing you can do is plaster a wall with paper and let people graffiti it. Let people write down things that they're celebrating or things that they're happy about. So what are your thoughts on this? What do you think about these exercises? Are these things that you can implement pretty easily? One person says, I imagine the bully doesn't get much response. You know what? When I did the exercise with my board of directors, actually there was one person on the board that I did not get along with, and forcing myself to do the exercise made me actually appreciate this person, because what I realized was she was sort of my devil's advocate, and that's why I was having a frustration with her, and why we were butting heads. And so in the end, it made me realize that I actually appreciated that she did that, because we were a board of directors, and the goal is to really hammer out the best things that we should be doing. And so it's a good exercise because it makes people realize, all right, people do bring something to the table. Okay, so I got one more idea for you, and this is probably my favorite and easily done. You can certainly ask your employees, once you've created your corporate values, to talk about the values on a phone a clip that they make on their phone, and then you can put together a little video. All right, one person says, I'm actually holding a lunch and learn and having another department deliver it. This is a job enrichment, allowing others to do something they enjoy, and I'm providing more info on training so they'll learn from me. Great, so you're already doing this exercise. That's awesome. Different examples provided will work in specific environments. In my office, the Wall of Fame might not work. Discussing how people view feedback would be well received. Okay, great point, Marty. So, you may not be able to implement 100% of what I'm offering, and you have to do what works for your organization 100%. I would take the appreciation one step further. What does this person do well, or what do they bring to the table that you do not? Oh, that's a great point. So how do they complement you and your skills is a good question. All right, awesome. So I'm glad someone says they really like the thank you technique. All right, great. So I'm glad you're finding these useful. So I do want to share with you that these little action items do work. So in that organization where we created the Thrive social vision, we created a strategic plan that was full of those smart action items. So it included all of the things I just showed you and many more. For example, human resources, their strategic plan regarding the values included things like adding the values to their performance evaluation forms, teaching managers how to coach people into behaving a certain way. So, you'll have a lot of larger, sort of more departmental action items as well. But for purposes of this webinar, I wanted to give you the easy ones, and they work. And this group actually did see a change in their culture. And actually, just so you know, the worst perpetrators, as they called them, quit within 6 months. So the people who were bullying were gone as a result. All right, so one small tip with this, as you complete these action items and you see little changes, you want to celebrate them. So celebrate small wins and then repeat them. And the more small wins you have, the more you have to celebrate, and the more you'll feel like you're making a difference. So step 6 is to provide training. So couple things. One, you do have to provide training on workplace bullying. Everybody needs to know what it is and how to stand up for themselves, and what it looks like and why it's bad. So I would definitely, if you have a bullying problem, you should have a training on workplace bullying. It's not going to solve the bullying in and of itself, but you should have a training on it. And again, you want to have training on more positive skills. So people can't do a don't. You can have a training and say don't bully, but you also have to say here's what you should be doing instead. So again, you want to, if your goal is to eliminate bullying from your workplace, you want to have positive skills that you're training employees on as well. Now the key is that one learning event does not solve a problem. So it's what happens after the learning event that makes a huge difference. So whatever people learn in their trainings has to be attached to performance. So your performance evaluations, for example, should have some of these things. So if you're going to do a training on communication skills, then some of those skills should then be in your performance evaluation forms. And you can certainly reward people. That's always a good way to inspire people to engage. So if you have a customer service training and people implement the stuff they learn in that training, they should be rewarded. So you can't just have a training. It doesn't solve the problem. You have to set up the environment for people to do what they've learned. Beyond that, managers also need some specific training on setting expectations, managing bullies, coaching people, and creating a positive workplace. So your managers are really your frontline defense for solving bullying. They're right there where they have the ability to solve it. And so they need the tools on doing that. Just because someone's a manager, it doesn't mean that they're assertive enough to speak up, as we've seen when we were talking about leaders. Just because someone's a CEO, it doesn't mean they're assertive. So you absolutely have to give managers the tools that they need. And again, what happens after the learning event is even more important. So when a manager is able to create a more positive work environment, they should be rewarded. So teach managers how to do this stuff and then reward them for doing it. And I've done plenty of training in all of these areas I've talked about. In fact, I always do my training in pairs. The employees get one training and the managers get a different training, and it works. So this is just one testimonial. I did a training in an emergency room at a hospital. They had some bullying. We were able to solve it through some training and setting up the right environment after the training, and then we proceeded into training some other departments because it had worked so well. So I know this kind of training works. Step 7 is regarding your performance management. So a couple tips regarding performance management. One is to take a look at your top performers and try to understand what makes them a top performer. So understand why people perform well, what they bring to the table, because you can emulate those people. Now, if your top performers are bullies, you want to figure out why they feel the need to act that way. So what I'm saying is sort of analyze your top performers so you can either repeat and get more people like them, and or remove some of those behaviors that you don't want from them. Everybody needs to have clear expectations on how they're supposed to behave. Everybody needs to have clear expectations on what their performance measures are. Definitely add your core values to your performance evaluation forms, and core values should be a regular part of conversation when it comes to performance. Just because someone is bringing in a certain amount of money, like we said, if their behavior is affecting others and making it so other people cannot perform, they should be held accountable to that. And one way to do that is through your core values. Reward people who are positive, and we call them positive energizers. So if you have somebody who just is always in a great mood, they, just bring positivity wherever they go, people like that person because they're positive all the time, they should be rewarded, and publicly reward them, so that people start to understand that, oh, if I act more like this person, I might get rewards too. So be very transparent that those are the people that are going to be rewarded. And again, managers need to provide coaching on how to behave and how to perform. So let's talk about that a little bit. That's my 8th step. You have to coach the bullies. How are we doing so far with this? Does this all sound reasonable to you? All right, I've got an excellent with an exclamation, a great with an exclamation point. I'm glad I'm giving you some information, empowering information. Great first steps. What's the title of step 6? Step 6 was, let's see, 7 is training, 6 is action items, creating action items. Okay, good. I'm glad you're getting a lot of good information out of here. Can you get the slides? Actually, Jill, I won't send out the slides, but I will send out a replay. So you'll absolutely have the replay available, and I'll send that out pretty quickly after we're done here. Okay, so let's talk about coaching bullies. So the first thing you have to do is convince the bully that they're perceived as such. So as you know, people aren't probably willingly just going to go, oh, people think I'm a bully, well, let me change, right? So to start off a coaching situation with a bully, you have to do a 360. So get the bully's permission, and I say the bully with air quotes because we shouldn't be labeling them, but makes it easy. So you'll ask the bully if you can do a 360-degree review for them, and you're not going to go around saying, this person's finally getting bullying coaching. You are going to be offering up the idea that this person's going through performance, or what am I looking for? Professional coaching, or they're going through executive coaching, or they're going through performance coaching. So, it doesn't have to be focused on the bullying. It's just this person's going through coaching so we can improve in their performance. And so we had some questions for you. And you will always get the bully's permission. I've never coached someone who said, no, I don't want you to do a 360-degree review. So you absolutely will get their permission. So you'll teach the right behavior. Once you've done that 360-degree review, you'll be able to come back to the bully and say, here's what people think. Here's how you're perceived. And from there, you can teach the right behaviors. So now you'll have them on board because they'll see what people really think about them. And then if they're not making a change, then you discipline them. And this is the key one key piece to solving bullying. And you know, bullying is allowed to thrive because nobody's telling someone not to act that way. So if you need to use discipline, use it. So one other thing I wanted to mention too is that when you coach a bully, the leaders absolutely have to be on board with that. And in fact, I won't do a coaching unless I've got confirmation that the leader had a conversation with this person and told them, I need you to change. And if you don't change, there's going to be some problems for you. So they have to be, and it doesn't have to be like, if you don't change, you're fired kind of a conversation. It doesn't have to go quite that, you know, deep, but it does have to be, there needs to be a coming to Jesus meeting between the leader and the bully. And again, I won't coach somebody unless that meeting's taken place. So you do have to have that as part of the coaching. All right, so let's see, I have some questions. We did 360s, but they were so negative that the CEO refused to deliver the results. What can you do about that? Oh, you know, you can't force the CEO to do something that they don't want to do, but I think the CEO probably needs to have a conversation with an outside party, someone like me who can have a conversation with them about why those results needed to be delivered. That's the only way that person's going to change. And you can let the CEO know that hundreds of people all around the world have had that conversation where they were perceived as a bully, someone did a 360, and then the results were delivered, and they got really bad information. And you know what happens in those conversations? Often the bully cries. They are shocked. They are sad. They are scared that it's gotten this bad and no one's ever said anything. So let your CEO know that it is a good conversation. The person is not going to freak out. You know, 99.9% of the time, the person who gets that bad information wants to change because it's like, oh my gosh, I did not know that that's how I was perceived. So maybe you can convince your CEO that it's actually a good conversation, you know, 9 times out of 10. And I can talk to your CEO about that. Again, I've got referrals, other people. I've got a friend who's been coaching in Fortune, you know, 100 companies for years, and she'd be happy to have that conversation with your CEO. So reach out to me if you want some additional help there. I missed this title to step 5. Let's see. So step 5 is create vision and values. Step 6 was create action items. We had training in there. You guys are making me think of, remember my steps off the top of my head. Let's see, someone says the coach needs to be careful. They may be working with someone who is not emotionally stable. The outcome can be very damaging to that person and potentially others. Good point. So if the person is engaging in bullying behaviors by freaking out, yelling a lot, you know, cussing, and that's how they bully, then they may, you know, the CEO may need to have somebody there with them to have that conversation, or may need to hire someone who's trained in dealing with situations like that. So that's a good point, absolutely. If the bullying is, you know, more under the radar kind of bullying, which is usually what the case is, aggressive communication is less often the situation. It's more often bullying and humiliation, or manipulation and humiliation. Then the CEO would be perfectly fine in having the conversation. All right, so going back to the steps. Step 1 was leadership. Step 2 was the audit. Step 3 was the policy. Step 4 was the social vision and values. Step 5 was the action items. Step 6 was training. Step 7 was performance management. And step 8 was coaching. Did we get that right? I see a lot of comments where people are filling in the blanks on the numbers. Okay, I got it. All right. Step 9, use grievances. So make sure that you put it out there that you're open to the grievance process. And so, you know, what happens is a lot of times people don't say anything because they don't know what's going to happen if they do say something. So you have to be very transparent that you are open to hearing complaints, that you're happy to take in grievances, and you want to help people solve them. And then when you do an investigation, so actually back up, the way you handle workplace bullying complaints should be exactly the same way you handle harassment complaints. You know, investigate, figure out what's really going on, and then react accordingly. And that's exactly what you need to do. That's harassment, and that's exactly how you solve a complaint regarding workplace bullying. They're no different. So if you do create a healthy workplace policy, you know, you're going to talk about what healthy workplace looks like. You're going to talk about workplace bullying and what that looks like. And then you're going to mention that you have an investigation procedure, and you'll copy your harassment procedure, and it will be the same exact thing. Now, I want to share a story with you. This actually happened to a friend of mine. She was a VP of a credit union. She was the VP of Learning and Development, and she had worked at this credit union for 10 years, and she reported directly to the CEO. Well, as the organization grew, they eventually got an SVP of Human Resources. So now this SVP of HR was in between my friend, the VP, and the CEO. So now my friend, the VP, is no longer reporting to the CEO as she had. She's now reporting to this SVP, her new boss. And she felt bullied by the SVP. And since we're friends, she'd read my book, and she actually ordered a copy of my book and gave it to the CEO. And she essentially filed a grievance with the CEO. And she said, this person's bullying me. Here's what I'm going through. Read a book about it. It'll tell you exactly what I'm going through. So the CEO hired an attorney to do an investigation. And the attorney did an investigation and came back with a report that said nothing illegal is going on here. So there's no harassment. And that's what the report said. So the CEO tells my friend, the VP of Learning and Development, there's nothing illegal going on here. The lawyer says there isn't really anything I can do. And my friend says, I told you it's not illegal. I know it's not harassment. It's bullying. And that's why I brought it to your attention. This was a waste of time and money. She's saying something I already was saying. And the CEO didn't know what else to do, and so he said, well, you're going to have to go back to reporting to this SVP, and we're dropping this. It's over. And of course, my friend did not want to talk to the SVP and didn't want to work with her, and so she quit. So they lost an employee of 10 years. This is a good story, not for my friend, but it's a good story that highlights how things can get twisted. So they hired a attorney who was only focused on the legalities, and that attorney missed the boat, and so did the CEO, because the CEO was following the advice of the attorney. So again, you know, just because it's not illegal, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And if you take in complaints, bullying might be harder to figure out, because with sexual harassment, for example, I could say, well, here's the joke that was told, and everyone can agree that that's sexual in nature. Bullying, as we've been talking about, and as you've been saying to me, is so much more under the radar. And so just because just because it's harder to determine, it doesn't mean it's not happening. And just because it's not illegal, it doesn't mean it's not happening. So grievances have to be handled carefully. And when you hire an investigator to respond to a grievance, hire an investigator who understands bullying. And there are plenty of attorneys out there who do investigations, who are aware of bullying and know about bullying and would give a report different than the one that this person gave at this credit union. So just wanted to put that out there. And then your 10th step is to lather, rinse, and repeat. So what that means is, as you make culture change, you're going to try things out, you're going to measure and revise, and then you're going to try again. So this isn't going to be just a one-time thing and then you're done. Culture change is a long process, and make sure that you're trying things out. No, they won't always work, and that's okay. You'll try something different. So with those 10 steps in mind, I wanted to ask you what you think and where you're at and how you're feeling about everything you're learning. I'm hearing or I'm seeing that was a powerful story. Maybe the CEO hired the attorney to cover their backside. Once I was hired to coach a CEO who was a sociopath, and I realized I was out of my element and pulled out. And that's a great comment, Greg. I think you're commenting on that last other comment about if the bully, is dangerous. So that's a great point. Coaches should certainly be vetted. A lot of good information. I can see us implementing many of your suggestions, clear and helpful. So I'm glad you guys are getting a lot out of this. So let me offer something to you. And you might be feeling like you're here. If you're thinking, gosh, this is 10 steps, there was a lot of information, a lot of you've been saying, as I've been seeing it come through, that you've been taking crazy amounts of notes and there's a lot to do. And that is true. So you might be here feeling like you've got a long way to go. And you might want to be there where you've got your social vision and you're able to move forward and solve the bullying. So you may have showed up today because you're tired of trying to figure out how to get people to stop dragging your company down. That's a waste of time. It's exhausting. You might want to do more of what you love and more of what you should be focusing on and less of dealing with bullying and negativity, and that's exhausting. And deep down, you know you have the power to make the lives of the people in your workplace better, and that you have the power to create an organization where people thrive and where they love what they do and when they respect each other. So that might be why you showed up, that you're sick of dealing with the negativity and that you know you have some power to make a difference in the lives of the people you work with. And I'm here to tell you it's time. I've heard so many heartbreaking stories of workplace bullying happening in an organization, and it's time to make a change. It's time for us all to make a change. And I want you to remember that nothing I've shared with you today is theory. These steps work. I can guarantee they work. If you implement all 10, you will not have bullying anymore. And I've used these steps with my own clients, and these steps are also supported by experts in the field of culture and in the field of workplace bullying. So I'm not giving you theory. And you might be thinking, well, where do I begin? What do I do? This is a long road. We've got, I feel like it's going to be a slow moving road. I'd like to be able to speed things up. And so I'm going to give you a gift. And I'm going to give you a free gift. A lot of times when you do free webinars, they try to sell you something. I'm not going to sell you something. I'm going to give you something. I am offering to do a free prevalence audit for you. Now, it'll be a 5-question prevalence audit. It won't be, you know, the whole shebang, but I am willing to help you get started. So if you're one of the people online today thinking, there's no way I can convince my CEO to even pay for an audit to prove that there's bullying, I'm offering up something for free. And what'll happen is I'll do a 5-question survey, and then you'll get a report from me regarding the responses and some ideas for action items. So it won't take you much time at all. Basically, you'll send 2 emails out, one to your staff with a link for the survey and one with a reminder. And that's all you have to do in terms of the prevalence audit. And then I will send you a report. It will be confidential. What you receive from me will be combined responses, so it will all remain confidential. So again, I'm offering a 5-question prevalence audit for free. You'll get a questionnaire, and we'll send that out, and you'll get a summary of answers from me, and you'll get a list of recommendations. So that's essentially what your report would look like. And then from there, I can help you implement the action items that we come up with from the prevalence audit. I can help you implement a culture focused on respect, dignity, and civility. And I can help you create a business where people thrive. Just so you know, whether you move forward on consulting or not, that's irrelevant. I'm offering you the audit. That's all you have to say yes to. So if you're interested in exploring doing the audit with me, please type yes into your chat box and I will contact you. And so please type in yes and I will absolutely give you a call. I have your email address and we can set up a phone conversation and we can go from there. Now, just so you know, even if you don't do consulting with me, I wanted to let you know that if you do, again, I do guarantee my results. If you do what I offer up as advice and you're doing the work, if you don't see results within 8 months, I actually guarantee my consulting work. So I know that's how much I believe in the steps and how much I know that they work. So in terms of what happens next, you're saying yes. I see a lot of yeses so far. So you've said yes. Again, I will email you. We'll set up a quick call so I can understand a little bit about what's going on with you. Then I'll create the questions for you so they will be tailored to your scenario. We'll send that link out. I'll collect the responses. I'll provide a report to you, and then we can have a coaching conversation where I can sort of guide you on how to present that report to your CEO. So I'm setting you up for success. I'm setting you up with the opportunity to make a case to your CEO. So with that, my contact information is there. Again, type yes if you're interested in engaging me for this free 5-question audit. And we have maybe a couple minutes for question. I think we're actually at time, but I'm happy to stay on and offer answers to questions. So go ahead and shoot. Any questions? How many questions is the audit? How many questions is the full audit is the question. There is no answer to that. There isn't like a template audit that I always use when I do the audit that's 10 questions or 15 questions or 30 questions. So there is no answer. The audit is designed around your situation, Joe. So even this 5-question prevalence audit, I'm offering up 5 because I'm doing it for free. And I just want to help you get your foot in the door with your C-suite getting on board. And even those 5 questions will be designed for you specifically in your situation. So if we were to do a full-fledged prevalence audit, it just would depend on what the situation is in terms of how we go about doing the audit and what questions we ask. Thank you a lot. I'm getting a lot of thank yous, and your knowledge and impact is appreciated. Thank you for attending. Any other final questions? I'm getting a lot of thank yous. Thanks all to you for attending and taking some steps towards solving bullying. Thank you all. All right. Thank you.